Welcome to Two Peas in a Podcast, a series of conversations with people in our community about their journey through life. Grab a cup of tea and join us for our chat.
Episode 9, Let It Shine. My normal speech, I use a lot of filler.
It's all good. It's all good. I'm a preacher. I use a lot of filler too. Welcome back to Two Peas in a Podcast. What a pleasure to be speaking with Theresa Belliveau this evening. Simon, as you know, Theresa leads a ministry that we have, that a team that brings the Blessed Sacrament into the seniors' homes. And so I've spoken to Theresa about this ministry, about her sense of calling into this ministry and the beauty of this ministry. And so I just wanted other people to be aware of not only the ministry, but yet another story of someone being called into this type of ministry. So before we get into a more in-depth conversation with Theresa, how about that last session with Dr. David Dean?
That was a course. I'm pretty sure we should get a university credit for that podcast. The thing that I was reflecting on when I thought about his episode is how much his zeal came through in what he was saying and how he was, presenting the information. I think it's Psalm 69, zeal for your Father's house will consume you, or something like that. Like he had such passion for knowledge and how knowledge can bring you to God,
He's an evangelist theologian.
He is, exactly. And, and he talked about in his episode, and part of his bio on his website was he sees his work as bringing people to Jesus. Like he sees people coming to a closer understanding and closer relationship with Christ through theology. And I think that's probably a way that most people don't look at theology, but you can come to a much deeper understanding of Christ as much as humanly possible through knowledge, through reason, and through theology. So I thought that was really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those themes are right out of St. Thomas Aquinas, of course, who had a huge intellectual and theological impact on Dr. Dean. So I'm not surprised you would pick up on that. So the only thing missing in this cramped little office of mine where we're recording this is a bowling ball. But thankfully, Theresa has the bowling shirt on. And so why don't you lob the first bowling ball at Theresa here,
Well,
Simon?
yeah, let's hope it's a strike and not a gutter ball to continue this analogy. But Theresa, thank you so much for coming. I know you were a bit unsure about being on the podcast, but it is just a conversation, and it's just a way for us to all share our own stories with people, because we all have unique stories and unique experiences that have brought us to where we are in our lives today. So we just love to talk about that. So I'm wondering if I could start off. Rob mentioned that one of your primary ministries right now in the parish is ministering to seniors, and especially taking communion to seniors' homes. Could you tell listeners what that involves?
We do a short communion service. We bring the Eucharist to anywhere from 30 to 60 people every Sunday. We are very passionate and connected with the seniors, which is something I didn't expect, but it has evolved. The service is very scripted because they don't want people running around doing what they want to in the name of the church. But we do a reading from the Bible, the Gospel. We usually take a reflection from Father Rob's sermon or Father El Rey's. I go to the Vatican News, and Pope Francis does a summary of the day's Gospel as well. There's lots of sources living with Christ. It's very easy. It's very uplifting. And people tend to get a little afraid when you tell them there's a communion service, they say, I'm not giving Mass. Well, it's nothing like Mass. It's very short. It's 10, 12 minutes. And you're giving communion to people who are starving.
And so on that point, Theresa, which is important for people who study liturgy of the church or interested in the importance of liturgy in the church, the brief liturgy that you use in the home is approved by the CCCB, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, and our local bishop for use in exactly what you do. And this is a perfect reason why we have reserved sacrament in the tabernacle. So if you imagine the image of all of those assembled around the altar for Eucharistic celebration, in which the elements are consecrated to become the body and blood of Christ, and then we reserve a little specifically for this reason, for viaticum, for people who are in the process of dying, and for the sick and the infirmed, so that your ministry flows out of the Eucharistic celebration of the parish around the altar. And yes, some of the hosts are reserved specifically for this ministry, shows the importance of community gathering. And it's one of the fruits that comes out of the community is a ministry like yours, which brings the body of Christ into seniors' homes in our parish. So it's lovely. And this is all approved by the Universal Church.
And lay-led.
And lay-led.
We've been talking in all of our episodes about how everybody has a way to evangelize. Everyone has a way to bring Christ to others. And this is an amazing way for lay people to kind of go through that process of reflecting on the gospel, bringing the gospel to others, and then bringing Christ to them in the Eucharist. And I had no idea that you had such a rich kind of service that you're providing in this, and it must be quite uplifting. How does it feel?
Very good word is uplifting. I usually leave smiling. This is a personal thing, but at the end of every little service, we do, like we tell them at the beginning, this is part of the Mass, it's ongoing, it's Celemaris, this is the Eucharist, we're sharing with you, we're bringing it. And at the end, I usually say something like, we brought the light of Christ to you today, through the church and through the Eucharist, and now it's our job to be the light of Christ to everybody we meet for the day. So we sing This Little Light of Mine, and it's amazing how many people know
awesome.
The words.
Oh my
it's
gosh.
Just there's clapping, and somebody who is asleep for half of the service is doing this. It's pretty neat.
It's very joyful. It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the word you use, light, I'm sure for folks who are in long-term care facilities, depending on how much interaction they get with others or what family support they have, sometimes there's periods without a lot of light. And you guys are bringing both light and joy and love and peace and community, in that one moment. So it must be again a huge kind of boost for them, emotionally and kind of spiritually, to get them through the rest of the week until you come back again.
That's a huge boost to me spiritually to get me through the week.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's incredible. Most of the time when you do something and you think you're giving, you're receiving.
Yeah.
And you don't actually appreciate it till you sit down and think, why am I feeling so happy right now? Why am I feeling so good? And then it goes back to, oh, okay.
And how long have you been doing this?
6 years.
Okay.
6 or 7 years. I can't remember when it started. It was pre-COVID. And it was started by Sister Joanna because we had a parishioner who was doing this, and he passed away, but he was doing this all by himself.
Oh, wow.
Every Sunday to the different nursing homes. And one day Sister Joanna was there with who was then our parish priest, I think it was Father Alfred. And they said, "Can you help us, please? We really need somebody to come because nobody filled in the void." And Sister Joanna did it for a while, but then she realized that that was not something that she could do on her own. So she wanted to set up teams. So she made the call at the church, anybody interested in doing it. And we had only 2 nursing homes at the time because we weren't an amalgamated parish then. So we went to Melville Lodge and Melville Heights every Sunday. And we alternated. There were, I think, 4 teams, so we went over every 4 weeks. And so we've been doing it since then. The teams have changed. I think I'm the only original left. Everybody,
you are the rock.
I am the rock. I should have that on my shirt instead of Theresa. But it was something the more I do it, the stronger I feel about it.
Were you nervous the first time you did it?
Scared out of my mind.
Can you tell us about that?
I have never been around old and infirm people other than my mom when she was dying and my father when he was ill. But that's your parents, and you're caring for them or looking after them, and neither one of them had dementia or Alzheimer. Neither one of them were bedridden for any length of time. So I was not sure what to expect. I knew that dementia and Alzheimer is a huge issue in the nursing homes now, so I wasn't sure how to talk to or approach. But more than that, I was really, really afraid of the lack of theological knowledge I had. I had the will and desire, but no real in-depth knowledge of what it was I was doing, other than bringing Christ to the nursing homes. But so that was, my lack of knowledge and the whole new experience was like something that I really had to leave my comfort zone to do.
Yeah, you kind of had to put your hand in the hand of God and say, "Lead me where you want me to go."
Yeah.
And help me to say what you want me to say. And so probably after a while, you kind of got into your groove a bit, and then you felt a bit more comfortable maybe? Or do you find that you always have that little bit of anxiety before you go and celebrate this service?
Well, first I have to say that I'm absent-minded.
Okay.
So when I was going to Melville Heights, which is an home for independent living, and a lot of our former parishioners are there, and they are very conversant with theology, with religion, with why you're doing something. So the first couple of times I went there, one lady, I brought her communion into her room. She said, "My dear, I appreciate your effort, but you got to learn this."
Oh, dear.
And so she was lovely, absolutely lovely. And so they taught me a lot. But I used to joke and say, okay, when I come in, you have to spot the mistake because I'm going to make one. So and
a little extra challenge for them during the service.
And it became a learning experience for them and for me.
So tell me about the internal dialogue of leaving the comfort zone and doing this. Like just in what you described. So you have this desire to do this. You have a request from Sister Joanna. Thanks be to God that she asked you to consider this. And in your mind, it sounds like you're thinking, I can't do this. I don't have a theology background. I don't know. I am not. I can't. But you did.
Yes.
Tell me about that process of going from not feeling like you're well enough equipped to actually doing it, and now not only celebrating 6 or 7 years doing it, but loving it more than you did the first day you went.
I think most times in my life, I've grown when I've taken this step, not knowing where the step is going to take me. It's kind of, I look at it like I'm stepping into a room in the dark, hoping there's a floor. It was a bit like that, but I also knew that I had a great guide. Sister Joanna was a wonderful mentor for teaching us. In a way, she was a little scary because she knows her scripture. And so when, at the end, when they were talking about whatever gospel story it was, she would wrap it up and talk about it. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that. But then I thought, I don't have to. I've got resources. So, yeah, I was scared. I think most people listening have a time when they really didn't want to or were uncomfortable doing something and they did it. And the process that makes you go forward is saying, I just can't stay here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think we kind of got a sense of that as well with our conversation with Greg. You know, he was talking about, you know, he knows that there are parts of being a priest that he's not going to enjoy. You know, things that don't connect, you know, with his strengths or his personality. But he knows that, you know, God's asking him to do it, so he's going to give it a try. And so, you know, I think perhaps similar to what you're saying is that you're going to be accompanied during that next step. You don't know what's going to happen, but you know that you're going to be accompanied in that. So that gives you the courage to make that step, so to speak.
Yeah.
Theresa, I love the image you created of, I think you said, stepping into a dark room, not knowing if the floor is there or not. In my very early days of being serious in my discernment of God's will for my life, Psalm 119 is a very long psalm. Verse 115, I believe it is, says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And the image that I had in my mind as I was discerning God's will was me carrying a little tiny lantern that would only illuminate probably a foot or two in front of where I was going. And so the image was my right foot touching the ground and thinking, okay, there's ground there, and then allowing it to bear more weight until it could withstand the weight of my body, and then I could go with my left foot. So that beautiful image of stepping into the unknown, discerning, letting it bear some weight, not knowing is there anything there, or is it a cliff edge? Does the house end and this door is to nowhere, or is there something that can bear my weight? So thank you for that beautiful image of something I haven't thought about in a long time. It's very beautiful.
The other thing that struck me in your description was that when you're not moving, you're rooted, you're safe, you're solid, right? But when you lift the foot to make that next step in that transition, you're vulnerable. You can fall down,
yes,
right? Until you land that foot again. You know, things may not go as planned.
Yeah.
But then every step you take, you're repeating that movement from comfort to uncertainty, but expectancy, and then to comfort again. It's a bit of a cycle.
Yeah, beautiful use of language there. Yeah, yeah. So you stepped out into that dark room, not even knowing if there was a floor. You stepped out of your comfort zone, and you did it, and it's beautiful. You spoke about the joy that you've experienced in people, this little light of mine being one little example. Is there any particular story that you want to share of a particular experience or a conversation or a person that touched you in a special way?
There's several, actually. When I first started going to Melville Heights as a gentleman, and I really curse my memory, but his first name was Ray. And he was an older gentleman. And he used to come and he'd sit at the front, and I remember Sister Joanne called him the bishop. And she'd always call on him at the end of her reading and say, not him specifically, but she said, does anybody have any thoughts on this gospel? And then she said, okay, bishop. And he did not like that title. But he was insightful. And within 3 minutes or so, he got to the meat of whatever it was in a way that I'm going, whoa. And that was a real awakening. The other thing is this man was of such deep faith. I remember specifically the reading of the Transformation. We were doing the Transformation.
Transfiguration?
Transfiguration,
Yeah.
Sorry. I told you my theological background is shaky. But anyway, and we were reading it, and that, like, saying that God did this, or Jesus did this to give strength to his disciples for what was to come. And I remember Ray saying after that, they saw that and they still doubted.
Mm-hmm.
So if they could see that and still doubt, what hope do we have? And then he said, so I have to always go back to Jesus, I trust in you. And it was like such learned so much.
Yeah.
And there is one gentleman at who needs more care, but when we do the service, before we start, tell them that we are from a Catholic church and that the Eucharist is a sacred sacrament to us, that we do believe it's the body and blood of Christ. Everybody's welcome to come to the service and to pray and to worship with us, but if they didn't believe it was the body and blood of Christ, to just cross their arms and we'd give them a blessing instead. Well, this one gentleman stopped me one day and said, I really believe it's the body and blood of Christ, but I've never had communion. He'd been to a Catholic church. He said his upbringing was chaotic at best, and he had a very strong faith in the Eucharist. And so he got his first communion from us, which was
That's awesome.
really cool. And I think the last story I'll tell you is that I don't always feel like I'm winning this game. So
But you're still playing.
I'm
That's the
still
main thing.
playing. But
I've never had that feeling. I'm not kidding. I'm joking.
one day I think I was by myself, and I had just a morning of things going wrong, me forgetting things, and it was the end of the service, and I had my hands over the pick, and I just closed my eyes, thinking, "Oh, you really have to think about this. Is this for you?" And I heard this voice, 2 voices saying, "Theresa, we love you. Thank you." And I was like, okay, carry on, Theresa.
Thank you, Lord.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, those are the ones there's lots of stories, but those are the ones that stick with me the most.
And I think, you talked about it before, like the hunger that people have for the Eucharist, for that time of gathering together, that time of faith together. It really speaks to how, we're all made to be connected, and to have folks who, unfortunately, through circumstance, are in some of these long-term homes without family support or, without a regular connection to others. It must be so soul-destroying to be in that experience. And what a grace it is that you guys are able to provide this. And how many times do you go a week?
We go every week, but because we have... This is, if anybody's interested, please contact me, because we'd love to go to every nursing home every week, but we can't right now. We don't have enough teams. So we go to Arborstone in Melville Lodge one week, and the next week we go to Melville Gardens in Melville Heights.
And you'd like to be able to offer this weekly if you had
possible,
more
yes.
teams. Yep. So how does someone, if someone is listening to this and thinks, yeah, I'd like to be part of this, how do they go about volunteering?
Contact me. I'm not sure if I can tell the rest of my team's number here.
No, well, perhaps, you know what, why don't I just simply, if it's okay with you, just call the office or email the office, which is office@StellaMarisHalifax.com, and we'll get the email to you, or just call the office at 902-477-3530.
Yeah.
And we can also put this info in the description of the video, of the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think if people tried it, if they came, just come with us. You don't have to commit. Just come with us.
Yeah. Yeah. The Eucharist, our Eucharistic response should be a shattering of loneliness, because I don't know about your experience of being in these homes. I'm in and out of them all the time as well. There's a tremendous amount of loneliness, a tremendous amount of whatever led them to being there in the first place, and dementia, Alzheimer's is high on the list just because it's so very, very sad, but a tremendous amount of loneliness. And I think your Eucharistic response, which has led you to bringing the Blessed Sacrament into these places, is part of what shatters the loneliness that people feel, especially in these twilight years of life. Do you have any comment about loneliness, your experience of witnessing that kind of loneliness?
Only that for some reason, when I'm there, I'm not a touchy person. I don't reach out and touch people, but I do a lot of it there without thinking about it. It seems to be a place that cries out for touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how very human, eh? Yeah, that's beautiful, Theresa.
Yeah, like people that don't get regularly held or hugged, or, a comforting hand, or a helping hand and so on. Like, I realize, of course, that the staff are angels themselves in many cases, and they go there fearlessly day in, day out, and look after the needs of the residents. But just, that regular personal and physical connection to say, I see you and I care about you, and I want to help you, and I want to be, for even just a moment, just part of your journey to support you. That is something I think we could all do more of, in our daily lives, is to understand the importance of just that moment of connectedness.
I'm profoundly moved by this. I'll share with you something that happened to me yesterday. I was with someone who had a possible stroke, and the impact on this person was that their demeanor totally changed. I mean, beyond not being able to move the right side of her body, demeanor totally changed. So I felt moved at one point just to rest my right hand on her forearm, just as a moment of, I'm here, just a moment of touch. And her head, although her demeanor was one that seemed like she was in a very confused state, maybe even not entirely sure what was going on around her, the way that she looked down at my hand on her forearm and then looked up at me was a look of communion. It was a look of solidarity. It was a look of communion, of compassion in the midst of it all. It was very meaningful. So Thank you for reminding me of that little experience from just yesterday. I appreciate that.
When you think, Theresa, back to young Theresa, your life growing up and so on, do you see some of these kind of, like the pattern you talked about of needing to get uncomfortable to move forward? Is that something that's gone on throughout your life?
I can't say it's a constant. It's been sporadic. It's been, I've never had growth without it. But I've never, sometimes it's very comfortable to be comfortable.
Okay.
I love that what you just said. I've never had growth without it. By being uncomfortable is where you have grown.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can you think of maybe some times before this where you've had to make that step to grow in your early life?
I think when you're finished high school, you've got so many avenues in front of you. And picking one is a step in faith. Like, this is the right path for me. I went to university. I finished university. I was graduated as a teacher, but when I was graduating, it was in the late 70s, and there was a teacher glut in Nova Scotia, and the only teaching jobs in the province were in French and chemistry, which weren't my bailiwick. So, and I didn't want to go north. I wasn't brave enough to leave home for, any period of time. So I switched jobs. I taught at the School for the Blind.
Oh, wow.
So you walk in and you absolutely green, and you've got 6 5-year-olds that are from totally blind to some sight. And I think if I had have known what I was getting into, I'm not sure if I would have done it. But it was really interesting because the one story that struck me about how little I thought in the same ways they do is they were building the new Sir Frederick Fraser School, closing down the old one. And these were kids that were from all over the Atlantic provinces going to board at 5 and 6 years old.
Wow.
And so the school was all abuzz about the sod turning. There's going to be a big sod turning, and everybody was out for the ceremony and all of this. And I'm talking about the sod turning, the kids trying to get, some excitement generated. And one of the little boys looked at me and said, "What's a sod?"
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So we went out and we felt the grass. I said, "This is a sod." And we picked it up, turned it over, and said, "This is a sod turning because we're breaking the ground." And but it's a whole lesson. And sometimes you think you understand how people say things, and you don't.
No, for sure.
But it's you talked about putting your foot inside of a room that was totally dark. And now here you are talking about these young kids who are blind. They didn't even know what a sod was.
Yeah.
And in the midst of what you just described as their hands touching the sod and flipping it over and feeling the other side, this is the light unto my path. This is an illumination of humanity that is part of your leading on this path. It's beautiful.
And part of, your own growth, like, as you said, when you came to get a sense as to how they see the world, how they experience the world, and how you had to adjust your teaching style and how you imparted knowledge, and really came to understand more than any of us here in this room, for certainly, what the life of a blind person is like. And like that's probably something which was transformational for you in how you probably saw the unsighted community and the challenges that they face.
Very much. It was very much. I remember teaching. We were going to teach about insects in the head, thorax, and abdomen. And my sewing skills are miserable at the best of times, but I decided to make a great big insect with the head, thorax, and abdomen, because you can talk about it, but if you feel it, when the legs and stuff. And I made this, and I think I was thankful in some ways that they couldn't see, because to them it felt like it had legs and that. They didn't know it had like 4 different colors and straws sticking out. But yeah, it made me think about how to change my perspective so that I can look at something the way somebody else. I'm not great at it, and I don't do it all the time. But when I think of it, I try to say, okay, what are they hearing when I'm saying this?
But there are probably, I'm not sure, but there are probably some kids who perhaps, were unsighted since birth. Maybe other kids began with sight and then, had lost their sight through a degenerative condition or something like that. So even within the unsighted community, you have this wide range of experience that they've had with the sense of sight. So you're also adjusting your teaching and adjusting your delivery based on their experiences too. So what a powerful example though of walking in someone else's shoes and what you learn about them through that process.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How long did you do that for?
2 years.
Okay.
Then I decided I probably should have a more secure source of income. And so I started working for the federal government.
Oh, okay. Well, there's probably a lot to be taught there too.
It was an interesting career.
Which part of the federal government were you in?
Department of National Defense.
Okay, Rob's old stomping grounds.
Yeah, I worked for the Navy and I worked for the Army.
Okay.
Come cheer up, me lads, 'tis to glory we steer. Sorry.
They never let me sing.
Well, hopefully they allowed you in the wardroom anyway.
Yes, that was.
Yeah.
Did you find that experience was another kind of clash of cultures where you had, the military culture and the civilian culture kind of figuring out how to work together with each other?
That's interesting because my last job was I was called an HR program planner, and I was the advisor to the Army in Atlantic Canada. What that really meant in actual fact was I translated contracts into Army speak into contracts.
You were a translator.
Translator and a facilitator.
Okay.
And somebody from Ottawa on the civilian side would take this, what sounded at the upper level to be an absolutely astoundingly wonderful program, and try to put it into effect in a place where it was never designed to work. So you'd say, okay, you'd go back and forth and say, well, this is some of the issues, and you'd play with it, and eventually it would make it fit. But that was, people will talk about all of this HR planning and stuff. I just called myself a translator and facilitator because that worked best.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, you guys can both speak to this, but the challenges of adapting, the military hierarchical command structure to some of the kind of modern trends in HR, we'll call it. A square peg does not fit into a round hole without knocking off the edges. Do you find that was part of the experience?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, it formed me in the way, like my approach to meetings is a lot different than somebody who's worked in a department that was all of civilians, where everything is done largely by committee and it takes 5 days to make a decision. I got used to, okay, this is why we're here. This is why we're going. If we want to talk off that subject, we don't do it here. We just go straight to that point. If you've got anything germane to that point, bring it in. And so I'm probably not the best committee chairman.
More
for
a case
anybody.
of the CO says you want this done, it gets done.
Well, no, yes, exactly. But it's still like when you form a committee for anything, you should have a goal. If you don't have a goal, then you shouldn't have a committee.
Exactly. Exactly.
Otherwise, it's a coffee social.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to work for the Department of Redundancy Department. So we used to make stuff up. I'm kidding.
But like again, even that experience, of understanding someone else's culture in this regard, was another probably moment where you had to say, okay, how is this Army person motivated? How has he been trained? How has this Navy person been motivated? How have they been trained to say, okay, now I need to impart this information in a way that will connect with their training and their motivation, because each, I'm sure, had different interpretations of what needed to be done and how to do it.
And I appreciate where you started your response. You spoke about burning off the edges around yourself too, and so every different opportunity, every task, every team, every committee, you've got to confront that you're bringing yourself to the table, and not one of us is perfect. And so there are edges which can learn, where we can learn and therefore become better at being part of committees and teams and leaders and the like. But we've got to have the humility to be able to be open to have our edges chipped away at.
Yeah. Yep. Not that it's painless.
Not that it's painless. Nope.
The other thing about military culture, which I think we can all learn from again, is that shared common mission, or that common goal, or at least that common understanding as to what the goal is. Like the vocation, we'll call it, to military service. I think it imparts a common set of values across the organization, which you may not see as strongly in, let's say, private industry, where, I don't think there's perhaps that same connection to achieving a common goal as part of who you are that you would see perhaps in the military experience. Is that something that relates or not?
I've only ever worked for Parks Canada in DND, and Parks Canada was a short time. And maybe I'm goal or objective driven, but I was hired to create it. This makes me sound like I'm, couldn't make up my mind what I wanted to do till I retired. But I was hired to catalog historic artifacts, pictures, war memorabilia, things like that. So it became, that was my goal. That was my common goal, to get a team together and to break that down and each have their way ahead. I know that once you started getting into the senior ranks and you started talking about the mission or whatever, then it becomes like, how many roads can you use to get there? So that's a little different than when you're lower down and you've got one goal, one thing to do. The church, Catholic Church, the first rule is to love. Love yourself, love your neighbor, love God. And people have many, many different ideas about how you show that. So although we have one goal, one aim, and everything, if it doesn't fit under that, probably shouldn't be part of the church. But everybody's got ideas of what that should look like.
Mm. I just find, like, in the folks that I know who have been in the military in the brief time I was in myself, it becomes a bit more of your identity, a bit more of you, of who you are, much more, I think, than you'd probably see, in the average private industry. Like folks who were in the Navy or in the Army and so on, that really defines them for the rest of their lives. Good or bad, it becomes part of when somebody says, "Well, who are you?" It's part of that. It's part of that response.
That's interesting because I've noticed if you look at obituaries, people who haven't been in the military for 20, 30 years, it'll be retired captain this or MWO that. And you're right. That's who they've identified with. That is who it would be on their tombstone. If that was, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the people you still connect to. I mean, I'm still connected to people that I served with over 30 years ago, which I'm not connected necessarily to people I worked with privately 30 years ago, but I know folks that I served. I mean, I was only in the reserves, but I'm still connected to people that I served with, again, 3 decades ago, which you don't see again. I don't think the same thing. Like you're connected to folks that you worked with, perhaps at, I don't know, PricewaterhouseCoopers 30 years ago, or Sobeys 30 years ago, or something like that. So there seems to be again this identity shift that occurs when you put that uniform on, or when you take your oath, and you're now part of this organization, which, to your point, there's many roads to get there, but there's a clear common understanding as to what your purpose is. And so that, I think, is something that, again, we can learn and emphasize as a church, is this identity factor which gives us that common purpose, or that shared experience which bonds us together, right? You are a Catholic for life, and we should be relating to other Catholics and spending time within our Catholic culture to support and strengthen each other and experience that common identity, that common vision.
So you mentioned even the word uniform, one, right? Form. It's one form, the outward appearance of something that at least has some sameness to it. And using your language of the vocation of love that we are called into as Catholics, of loving God with all your heart and all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So the uniformity, to have an identity shaped in love, is something, you're right, obviously, we should get better at. But why do you think in the military that connection is so strong? Whereas in this, it's an unfair comparison, but in this church thing where we still have a mission, why do you think it is so tight in the military, or the formation is so strong, or the identity building is so strong, in your opinion? What do you make of that?
And again, I look forward to getting your guys' response on this too, but I think it primarily comes from shared experience. Like when you're serving together, let's say on a ship, or you're deployed together, in a theater, or if you are, working again, perhaps on a base together, you're part of a ship's company or a regiment or something like that, or a squadron if you're in the Air Force. Like you have shared experiences together. Shared experiences,
yeah, for sure. I think through those shared experiences and the intensity of team building, there's a high level of trust. Mm-hmm. That's something else that resonates. I don't know. What else do you think?
Well, for sure. And then just to build on the shared experiences thing, like, again, 30 years ago, we talk about stuff we did on our basic training, or stuff we did, when we were out on exercise, or experiences like that, or, stuff we did when we went downtown together, when we were in New Brunswick and things like that. Like, those shared experiences come from spending time together. And I think perhaps that's one of the things that we as a parish, as a church could do more, is just experience things together as a parish, as a group. So we gain that shared knowledge of each other and that experience of achieving a common goal, which kind of binds us together a bit more.
I think that resonates with me very strongly, and I think it's perhaps part of the DNA that's behind the small group bit. Small groups where you can share more. A typical Sunday Mass, we get between 530 and 600 people here on a typical Sunday. So it's too high of a number to have intense relationships with all of them. But if we are part of a small group, or we join a ministry team focused on one aspect of the mission, as Theresa is with bringing the Blessed Sacrament to seniors' homes, then hopefully it's an opportunity to get to know people better, to dig a little more deeply into yourself in an environment where hopefully there's a high level of trust.
Yeah.
So that if you need a conversation around a faith matter or a personal matter, that's what these teams are for, right? So we can work all that together. But I think trust is hugely important. If Simon and I have a high level of trust for you, I have a high level of trust for you too, Theresa. So I'm more likely to share something that is a little more deep, a little more personal, or a little more important than I would be with just anyone I meet on the street, of course, right? So trust is hugely important in building teams that are focused on a purpose and a common understanding of what that purpose is.
That's interesting that you say that, because I came to church on Sundays because the voice inside me said, you have to, go to church on Sundays. And there was becoming part of this ministry is the first time in many, many years that I felt part of a church community, because all of a sudden went from a Sunday parishioner to having a community, even if that small community was the people I serve with. I go into Mass now and I know a lot of people. I say hi. I mean, for many years, I'd say, I think that person goes to my church. I might know their name. Now I might know something about them.
This is very beautiful to me, and I don't want to use too negative language. I don't intend this to be negative. But is it fair to say that you went from being a religious participant to a disciple? You went from being you went from being a consumer of something that you desired, to go to Mass. That's good. I don't want to belittle how important it is to fulfill our holy obligation to go to Mass. But you went from just going and receiving to responding, which caused you to grow deeper in discipleship. Disciple is the same root word as discipline. Speaking, there's another military word, right? Discipline. Discipleship, same root as discipline, where you get to burn off those edges. You get to step into the unknown, which might be fearful, might evoke fear, but it's where you also grow in confidence. And so, is that fair enough to say that you went from being a participant to being a disciple?
I think it's fair to say. I can honestly look in the mirror and say there's a disciple. It's not the way I think of myself, but I have become more more of a For some reason, the word flow keeps coming through my head. But what I'm receiving is flowing through to others.
Yeah.
Through the church, the Eucharist, through whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas it came before and stopped.
Right. Okay. So what you received, like you received something, it kept you coming back to church. Mm-hmm. You went for a reason. But when you say it stopped, it's because you weren't living out of that, yes, in that flow that flows through you. So let's unpack the word disciple a little bit, because it might be a weird word to use in this day and age, but I think we need to unpack it. And so what if we use a different word of an apprentice? So you went from receiving to being apprenticed by someone like Sister Joanna, and what a beautiful mentor under which to be an apprentice, so that you can learn a little more about how to respond to this and living it out in the world. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
Yeah. So rather than just receiving and coming back next week, your response was to participate in this somehow, and I would argue that that is the pathway of discipleship. And in so doing, although, as you said, when you started all this, you weren't a theologian. You're not a theologian now. I'm not a theologian either, to tell you the truth. But you're open. You have an open spirit to learn and to see where the Holy Spirit leads. Is this all fair to say?
Yes, I think so. I think sometimes, I don't know about other people, but I think sometimes that quiet voice that's here sometimes gets arm wrestled by my ego and by my fears.
Absolutely, sister. That's the journey. And when you go home tonight, you just said, when you look in the mirror, what you see is not a disciple. I want you to see a disciple, because that's what I see when I look at you. When you're leading this ministry and the conversations that we've had, you are a disciple. That doesn't mean we're the perfect theologian or perfect this or the perfect that, but we're someone who is under the authority of God's mercy, who sent his Son into the world and gave us the gift of the Holy Spirit so we can learn as we go, so we can take one more step, right? Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, so that we can step out a little bit more and learn. That's what a disciple is, and you're a disciple.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in the Jewish context, the disciples of a rabbi were trying to be the rabbi.
Totally.
Right? Their goal was to mimic and emulate the rabbi and become
totally
rabbis themselves, So we are all in that process of trying to emulate Christ in the way that we love and the way that we care for others and the way that we, have a relationship with God. So, we're all disciples on this journey, and it's hard to put that title on ourselves, I think, sometimes, because it does have a lot of meaning behind it. But we are all disciples, and we're all called to emulate the Master.
Totally, absolutely. If you want to be a good carpenter, hang around with great carpenters, right? Learn the skill. If you want to be a great race car driver, hang around with great race car drivers.
And if you want to be a good Catholic, hang around with good Catholics.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. You want to learn to love a little better in this crazy old world? Hang around a little more with Jesus.
Amen.
Read his word, receive him, be around other people who are on the same journey, and it's a beautiful path.
And getting back to your stepping out of the dark analogy and kind of tying that in with the shared experiences, it's a much different experience to step out in the dark by yourself as to if you're stepping out in the dark together with others. like everyone's stepping out together into the dark. It's a much different experience than when you're doing it yourself. You have the support of others, and you have the knowledge of the other's presence as you make that leap.
I appreciate that, Simon, because for me, there's both an intense sense of community, which is good, but also there's a moment of my own personal intention too. Like there's some part of me that can only give my yes for me. So it's still both very personal, but also communal when we do it together. Mm-hmm. I think of the process of dying, for example, and the beauty of being with people who are dying when they're surrounded by family, friends, when they're surrounded by loved ones. Mm-hmm. But for the person who's dying, there's also still an intensely personal process of letting go in trust. Yes, mm-hmm. A good death involves being surrounded by community, surrounded by loved ones, absolutely. But it's still a very, very personal process of surrender. And I think so too for what we do in church. Yes, it's good to be part of community. Yes, let's have a strong, beautiful community where we can be vulnerable because there's a high level of trust. Yes, absolutely. But we also need to be personally committed ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you make that personal commitment, but you're still afraid, then yes. having that sensation of someone holding your hand,
absolutely,
right, gives you that extra, I guess, faith to say, I'm going for it.
There's not one single I in the Our Father. Give us this day our daily bread. There's not one I in the Our Father. This is a communal activity we're called into that needs our personal yes.
And one of the analogies that I've heard, and unfortunately Dr. Dean's not here, so he can't tell me which saint it was, but there, and perhaps you know, Rob, it's this imagery of like a pond and a river. You know, like we can be ponds where we just receive grace, but we store it. We store it in ourselves. And that pond can get stagnant because the water's not changing. But when we share our faith, when we, in essence, connect a river to that pond so that the grace flows out, we're able to receive new graces that come in, refresh our own faith, but then also feed others with the grace that we're passing on, from the Eucharist or from prayer or from, all of the sacraments that we could experience as part of our faith. That outflowing of grace that we have received is so important in keeping our own faith life fresh and vital.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly the same sentiment that you were expressing a few minutes ago. On the flow. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Passing on, living out of what you received, passing on what you have received, participating in what you have received, so that ultimately, to use your language, the language of the church, so we can love a little better.
Amen.
And swinging back a bit to that military analogy, you learn from, the senior officers. You learn from your, let's say your platoon leader or your division commander or, your squadron leader, whatever it is. You're learning from those who have gone before.
Totally. And the crusty old chief who's been around the block a few times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 100%.
So, the crusty old chief is your mentor in your trade as a, as a naval officer or as a signalman, whatever the trade is. But also in our faith life, we have the crusty old parishioner, who can, like the bishop you talked about earlier, right? You have the crusty old parishioner who has seen it all, done it all, and has thought about it, and can pass on so much experience of faith and how it has sustained them through their trials, through their lives, their joys, etc., that we in turn can learn from them about our own faith journey and how to handle it.
It's great. And our next episode will be on teaching patience for me to deal with crusty old chiefs.
Absolutely.
Theresa, any parting words, anything you want to share, any topic that you wished we had covered we didn't, that you want to bring up?
There's lots of topics you covered, and the one on community in the church, and mentoring in the church. I think we have a break in, probably occurred in the last 60 years, and what people learned about the church and what they learn now. My parents knew a lot about what they believed and why. They never actually sat down and talked to us about it, because they assumed we'd get it the same way they got it, which was through church, through the church schools, through... So in one generation, there's a whole loss of knowledge. And I probably compounded that with my children. We went to church. I'd like to think I did the same thing for them that my parents did for me. And you live a life of kindness and compassion. But I never connected that with... we never sat down and talked about how that's reflected in the Bible and in the New Testament.
Connecting it with the source of compassion.
Yeah. I mean, I have said to my children, when they are, because kids rebel and they start talking about,
it's a natural part of maturity.
Yeah, that, pulling away from the church. And all I said to them when they did say is to say, tell me one part of the New Testament or Jesus' teachings that you object to. You can go back to the Old Testament, you can go back and because we couldn't understand the context, we couldn't whatever. But tell me what you think you can't live that Jesus taught. And they really didn't have an answer for that.
And I think an interesting thing you mentioned there, again, formerly, let's say perhaps before Vatican II, perhaps, in that 60-year time period, he talked about how, knowledge of the faith was assumed and living the faith was also assumed. Like, so, well, of course you're going to be a Catholic, because, I'm a Catholic, so you're going to be one too. We don't have that kind of automatic Catholicism, perhaps, that you would have seen in earlier generations, because we've given that, that kind of freedom, the freedom to discover, that freedom to choose your own path, which, is good in itself, but we haven't done a good job as explaining why we do the things we do. Like, there are many ways that people serve their community, serve others, and so on, for a variety of different motivations. Part of what we need to do in our own lives is say, I do this because of my faith. I do this because of my love of Christ. And here's how I understand that the life of Jesus that has been given to me in the scriptures provides that example for living the way that I am. And so I think when you have that experience of something positive, and it jumps back really to episode 1, where we're talking about our thresholds of conversion, people first need to start with that positive experience of something that is identifiably Christian. They need to see that, to say, Theresa does this service to people in long-term care facilities. It brings her joy. It brings her fulfillment. It brings her a sense of peace and a sense of completeness. Well, why is that? Theresa does this because of her love of Christ and because of how she understands how Christ has provided an example for her on how to live her life. And so, we need to, again, collectively as a church, start being more explanatory. Back to your story about the kids at the blind school with turning the sods. Like, they had no idea what a sod was until they experienced it. People don't necessarily know what faith is or what a religious faith is until they experience it. So I think we're called to do provide those experiences for them in a compassionate and accompanying way. And I'm sure that the people who perhaps aren't part of your service each week, they still look in and see you guys together as a community. They still look in and see you guys singing This Little Light of Mine, together. And I'm sure there's something appealing that they're like, wow, that there's something about that group of people that is obviously bringing them together in a moment of joy, in a moment of togetherness. I'd like to be part of that, and you had somebody who had their first communion at, during one of your services because he had, I'm sure, a set of positive experiences around faith, which motivated him to say, I now want to step out into the dark and say, I intellectually understand what it is. I now want to experience it, experience the sacraments, which each one has that physical sign,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something we in our daily lives need to do more of, providing those signs and experiences of our faith and understanding why we do it, so that when we're asked, we can provide that coherent answer.
Theresa, I'm so happy you agreed to come on our podcast. You're leading an inspirational ministry for me. You inspire me. I'm so thankful for your yes. It's a hugely important part of us in Stella Maris Parish as being the community of faith that we are striving to achieve, striving to be. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to also say I'm not in this alone. I have a team of very
Amen.
wonderful volunteers that make my leadership a joy.
Well said.
Amen.
Well said. Can you do this for me when you go home? Look in the mirror and say, I'm a disciple.
I will.
Amen.
You're a disciple. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening. Simon, over to you, brother, for last words.
Yes. Again, thank you so much, Theresa, for this. It's been quite an inspiration again. And I love the joy that you're getting from this ministry. And
yes.
I hope that everybody in all of the ministries and the different work that happens in the parish get that joy from what they're doing, because that joy is what's going to sustain you and keep you coming back for more. So we hope that everyone has that experience of joy from serving the Lord together. We encourage everybody who's part of our podcast experience to continue to listen to each podcast that comes out. We suggest that you like and subscribe to make sure you get more great content from Father Rob's channel. And don't forget, again, click that notification bell so you're the first one in your block to hear when the next podcast comes out. Theresa and Father Rob and myself, we're all part of the community of Stella Maris here in Halifax. We want you guys all to be part of it and to experience the joy that we get from serving the Lord together. So please go and visit us online at StellaMarisHalifax.com or on Facebook at, again, Stella Maris Halifax, and connect with our community. We'd really love for you to be part of it. And if something in this podcast has jumped out to you, has inspired you, please leave us a comment and be part of our online conversation. And if you are within our Stella Maris boundaries and are interested in Theresa's ministry that she's leading, please, as mentioned, contact the office and we'll be happy to connect you with her.
Thank you very much. Thanks again, Theresa. God bless you, and God bless you all for listening. Take care.
I do think we could do one thing as a kind of an outro for this. We could sing "This Little Light of Mine."
This little light of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it
do
shine.
a second verse. Don't let anyone blow it out.
I'm gonna let it shine.
Don't let anyone blow it out.
I'm gonna let it shine.
Don't let anyone blow it out.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
That's it.
Thank you.
I'll be signing next door. You can cut